Welcome to the Lemons and Pineapples podcast. I'm your host, Emma O'Brien, personal development coach, heart math practitioner, dog photographer, and entrepreneur. In this podcast, I share tools, strategies, and amazing guest interviews to help you improve your mindset and your well-being with a sprinkle of fun and probably some mention of dogs along the way. So without further ado, let's squeeze the day. Hi folks, welcome to episode 35 of the podcast. Today my guest is Carolyn Deck, and we're going to be talking about tapping into your power to make active choices in life rather than being in perpetual reactive response to what's happening around you. Before we start, let me tell you a little bit about Carolyn. Carolyn Deck was born and raised in New Zealand, and having spent over 25 years away from her homeland, Carolyn is no stranger to change. She's lived in Australia and America with her best friend and husband for 32 years, whilst raising their 5 children. She's travelled to over 20 countries, experiencing many adventures and trials along the way. Taking the courage to conquer past childhood pain, she used the secrets hidden in the dark crevices of her life to live in victory. She learned her choices landed her in destinations both good and great, plus sadly on a number of deserted islands. However, knowing her responses are key, she refocused and now has her travel mates, peace and joy, and lives with certain hope. Her desire is to equip and empower others to live a life they never thought possible. Carolyn is the author of Above the Turbulence, Your Ticket Out of Pain to Purpose, which is what we're going to be talking more about today. Welcome, Carolyn.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Emma. It's lovely to be here.
So we're going to be talking today about the power to make choices in life when it comes to dealing with circumstances and other people rather than being in kind of reaction to things. And I think this is where a lot of people sit. We're constantly reacting to what's happening around us. And I know with my own journey of personal development and with the coaching training I have done, having the ability to be able to take a step back before saying anything, doing anything, firing off an email has been really quite transformative for me. And I know it's something that's a big theme in your book, Above the Turbulence. So when you talk about the power of being able to respond, what in your view is the difference between a response to something and a reaction to something?
That's a really important question. I think it's a little layered from my experience. And please note, everybody, I'm no professional. This is all drawn from the experiences of my life and my transformation, actually. So really, I think it can start with our focus. And my experience is that when we react to something, generally speaking, in my case anyway, the focus is all about me in my head subconsciously. And I'm like, I'm reacting out of, maybe defense or fear or, I really feel like I have no control. My thought process, well, perhaps there isn't any, right? And a lot of the time too, perhaps there's no filter either. So I feel in the reaction mode, our focus is really all about us.
Yeah, totally. And I love what you're saying there with that, because it's a great perspective on it. And you're right. When it's all about us, we don't have a filter in terms of how might what I say be received, or actually is what's being said about me at all. But in the moment when we're reactive, it is all about us. We make the assumption, don't we? It's all about us.
Yes. And I think that actually stems from having that happen to us.
Yes.
Right? So people have in our past maybe, or in our childhood, have just blurted out without filter comments that have impacted us. And so it's almost like a learned behavior, right? And so you're mirroring what you perhaps have experienced in yourself. So on the contrast to just reacting, when we stop and pause, to your point, we can actually respond, and the focus shifts from us to perhaps the person's receiving our words or our behavior. And so that then is kind of pivotal, because we've paused for a minute, we're a lot more thoughtful, and we're possibly thinking more about the other person and the impact. You know, over COVID, I've been listening to my husband with his Teams meeting, global meetings. And he says, he would say to his team all the time, come on, people, choices have consequence. And I think from just in the last month, talking to a lot of people and doing book launches, etc., I've come to the realization that I don't know that a lot of people are aware that they have choices. I think with the busyness of life and the turbulence of life, it's pretty rough out there. Yeah, it's pretty rough. And so, it's really affecting how our behaviors. And so when we can just stop and pause and really understand where these responses are coming from, and that yes, we do have choice, and how we respond is not only key, but it's really powerful.
I totally agree with you. And I think the one thing I have found, and I'm interested to know what work you've done that's shifted this for you, is I have found often my own reactivity comes from a place of being stressed, from being overwhelmed, from having too much on my plate. And then somebody asks you for something, and it's this sort of this trigger stacking, and it's the last thing in the list of an overfull plate. And they're often the people that get a short response. I'd like to think I can taper in my sort of resentment sometimes of being asked. I don't think I always do. But the more work I have done on calming my own nervous system, of being able to manage my schedule better, being able to manage my time better, I find I'm less stressed, and I'm able to actually be more patient. Because I think often when we're coming from a place of reactivity, especially if someone's asking for what's an innocuous request, but it's the top of it goes on the top of the pile of the already over full stuff, you can feel like, God, is this person trying to really piss me off? And it's never personal. Well, not never. I mean, we don't know, but it's very rarely are other people sitting thinking, "Ooh, I know how I'm going to ruin Emma's day." I mean, none of us really think like that.
Right. Yes. And to your point, we actually set our own schedules. So there's a choice. It's all about choices. It really is. And so, you're asking me personally how I've done this. And yes. And so first, I believed it did start with the awareness that I have choice. And then I paused and had a real truthful revisit. I didn't want to relive, but a revisit of actually, who am I? Who am I? And do I know who I am? And have I listened to the words of other people speaking into my life that just maybe, they're not true? And so for my own process, I revisited what I believed, one, about myself. And it's interesting, isn't it, when we look at the word believe, BELIEVE, there can be hidden lies in what we've heard, what we tell ourselves. We're our own worst enemy, actually, Yes. And so what I've done, and my book's a travel themed book because I was a travel agent and I love travel. And so I likened it to being your air traffic controller.
Mm-hmm.
We need to control the thoughts that come in and send them away. We actually have, this is why I mean it's so powerful. We have choices, and how we respond is key. And it's really powerful when something's coming and you're going, actually, hang on a minute. No, I'm not going to let that land here in this headspace, because then it can filter down into our hearts. And then from out of that, that's where we are reacting. So Andy Stanley, a guy I follow, says it very well. What we believe, consciously or subconsciously, and there's a lot of subconscious untruth in what we're believing, that is how we act or react, and then that's given us the outcome. And the fool is the person that continually acts the same way, expecting a different outcome. And so to his point, we need to stop and pivot and pause and slow down and revisit what we believe, because just maybe what we believe about ourselves or what we believe about the world, just maybe it's not actually true.
Yeah, I love that. And that's a big part of the coaching work I do. And one of my favorite tools I learned in the Martha Beck coaching training that I did is this piece that our circumstances create our thoughts create our feelings, and our feelings create our actions. And often circumstances they just are. But we have all sorts of thoughts about, that's not fair, that shouldn't have happened to me. Clearly this person is trying to irritate me by giving me yet something else to do, and the feeling that comes out of that. So if we take this example of reacting versus responding, if we're thinking when someone puts in a request for something that this person's just trying to irritate me and we feel angry, you are then very likely to send a snotty email to that person.
Yes.
And I think it's so important in that moment to actually just take a step back and go, hang on a minute. What am I feeling? What is going on? And often it's like we've said, it's a kind of a accumulation of things that create these thoughts and these feelings. And it's actually time to start having a look at, if you're constantly feeling angry and reactive all the time, what's going on in life? What are the circumstances that you actually need to start changing?
Yes, I love that. I love the fact that you're asking the question, what, not why. The is, again, monumental in my experience and in my opinion, because why has you sitting as the victim?
Yes.
What doesn't? What is the question that empowers.
Yes.
And I love that what. And, for myself as a child, but revisiting, as I say, not reliving, I started asking these what questions, like, well, what was going on back then? What was going on with my mum? What was going on with my dad? What was it that created this turmoil? And instead of going, poor me, I was this child, and why did it have to happen to me?
So I think, just to go back to your point about talking about dysfunctional childhood stuff, because I think often that can be the root of a lot of the things we believe about ourselves. And you're talking about, I think you use the word, I'm not worthy, and this is such a common thing. In fact, I've been working with a coaching client this morning about a belief that she was talking about, a belief that I'm totally useless. Now, this is a very accomplished woman, and she was told when she was small, if she wasn't achieving, what are you doing?
Yes.
And it's so interesting how these, and we were looking this morning about dismantling that belief, and how can we start to heal that,
Yes,
so that you're
yes,
not constantly going through life thinking, she said she got 3 degrees with a 90% success rate and still feels useless, which is, and I'm saying to her, could we just hold up a minute with this? And we were working through the fact that it's time to start challenging this belief you've got. It's not true, and it isn't true. I say true in inverted commas, but we believe these things to be true because as children we take them on board. And I think a lot of this work, we're talking about choices, and we're talking about how your choices change things, is we always have a choice to do the work on ourselves and challenge the things we believe about ourselves. And often when we start to heal that, it's easier to kind of respond a bit better to the other people in life, because we're not responding from this place of hurt or inadequacy, really. So if I would like to hear your take on when you hear, because I hear it often, people will be doing things in life they don't want to be doing, but they'll say, I don't have a choice about that. And you and I are having this conversation saying, people always have a choice, but I don't think that people always know they have a choice.
Right.
So what would you say to people, and what would your advice be on how they can empower themselves to get into that place of choice about life, so they can do something different in a life that is kind of restrictive, I suppose?
Right. Well, again, from my experience, and looking at those that are dear to me that are still struggling, you described my mother, my beautiful dear mother. She is such an intelligent woman. She's 87, but she's still living into the lie that she heard as a child.
Yes.
We're talking 70 years, and it's totally defined her life.
Yeah.
So the question you asked me is, how do we change this? How do we empower somebody? Well, from my experience, we have to change the narrative. So the narrative, it starts with ourselves. What are we listening to?
Yes.
I mean, I also talk in my book about sound cancelling, headphones.
Yes.
So that person that says they're useless, they can start with putting on noise cancelling headphones to block out that monologue in their head that says on repeat, you're useless, you're worthless, you're hopeless, and say, okay, I'm going to block that, and I am actually going to change the narrative, and I'm going to choose what playlist I listen to.
Very powerful.
And I can't do that for them, and you can't do that for them. Likewise with my beautiful mother, I can't do that for her. And so that is where, yes, there are choices.
And I think it's just so brilliant that you talk about your mum with such compassion. And I think again, therein lies a choice of saying, from what I understand of your upbringing, it was challenging because you're being raised by a mother who is sitting with a set of limiting core beliefs that probably meant about herself that were reflected on you, I imagine.
Yes.
And even though it sounds like there was quite a lot of unhappiness as a result of that, you are able to take a step back and compassionately say, it wasn't right. It's not true what I came to believe as a child or what was said to me, but my mother is operating from a place of having done, I imagine, very little introspection, very little work to challenge what was going, because she probably doesn't believe that she can change that. And I think it's often, with the exception of horrific child abuse, I think many of us can relate to having childhoods where we didn't get the attention we wanted, we didn't get our needs met. And I know, I look at my own parents, they were doing the best they could with what they had.
Yes.
And I know from parenting my own child and then thinking, being at the age my parents were certain things happening, and I was just thinking, I totally understand why they were so caught up with work, because the overriding kind of challenge for them was earning enough money to be able to keep paying for everything, to be able to allow me to have the things I wanted. I didn't go without as a child, but I look at it and I think my parents were quite stressed as a result of that. Yes. But when you're able to kind of take a step back and look at the perspective, it takes away, like you said, coming back to the beginning of the conversation, that that wasn't fair.
That's right. Yes. And I was chatting with somebody yesterday, and when we realize with our parents and with marriage that really we don't have it all together when we get married, do we?
Nobody does.
Nobody does. So to that point, two broken people come together. They come together in the hope that it's going to be amazing, and the honeymoon is. But then life happens, and then what baggage they've brought, consciously or not, now is in this pressure cooker under a roof of a home. And it's, in a way, I guess it's no wonder things don't work out terribly well.
Yeah.
And so, two people coming together to have a child, married or not these days, right? Does not mean that it's a foregone conclusion. It's going to be fabulous. And so to what we were saying before, when I stopped and pivoted and looked back, I do have compassion for my mother hugely, because then I looked at what she went through as a little girl. She was raised on a farm. She had no friends. She was miles from anywhere. Her best friend was her horse and her dog. Yes. And so now she's a teenager struggling with, how do I communicate with people? And then she gets swept off her feet by my dad, who is this charismatic, handsome man who just like, wow, and you want to focus on me and you love me. And and so that's how it started. But sadly it didn't stay there. And so the way my mum handled her grief of what she had hoped for in marriage, she turned to the bottle, and my dad turned to busyness. My dad just and he was just not at home, and when he was at home there were fireworks, so then he would eat again. And so it was like, wow. So my dear sweet mother said to me one time, so darling, Dad brought into your life the opportunity to learn and explore faith and God. What have I done? And this is harsh. I admit it's harsh. And I did warn her. I said, Mum, this is hard to hear. I said, you gave me almost the most valuable thing. And so her eyes kind of lit up for a minute. Then I said, you taught me how not to live.
Yeah.
And then her eyes looked down, and then she doesn't cry very much, actually.
No, I could imagine. Yeah.
And then we both cried, and I embraced her. And I said, Mum, that is so powerful, and it breaks my heart to see your life, your shattered life, and the choices you make. But you know what? That taught me what rabbit hole not to go down. That is so empowering. And I looked at your life, and I'm like, I have a choice. I'm not choosing that.
Yes. And I think that's wonderful, because I think it's interesting. I had I was in a relationship with a guy for a while, and I remember him telling me about he had quite a horrific childhood, really. And his father was cruel. And but I don't think he ever made a choice to do it differently. And I watched him be incredibly cruel with his own child, with my animals, with me, which is why I sort of, I said, thanks very much, I'm out of here.
Yes.
And it's just interesting that you have kind of, I think there's an evolution with people. People either choose to learn from an experience and have something different, or they choose not to. And it's very interesting, just as we're talking, I can remember him saying to me one time, well, we all turn into our parents, don't we? And
that's his belief.
That's his belief. And there we sit with we come back to this piece, yes, about this power of belief. But this man didn't think he had a choice. It is almost like it was a foregone conclusion. And I think it's so powerful for us to wake up and realize that if you don't like something, you can change it. If you don't enjoy something that's happening, you can choose to do something else. You might not immediately be able to do that, but as soon as we stand in that power of realizing that actually I don't have to live like this anymore, it's hugely freeing. I think it's and I hope from our conversation today that's what people take away from it, is that however difficult something is, there is in the difficulty somewhere there will be probably a learning of some description. Sorry, usually these learnings are hidden deep in the depths of despair, and then you can start to have a look at, all right, what could I do differently? It might be one tiny thing that you change, and step by step you have the choice to make a change.
I call it's the workout you don't want. You go to the gym, right?
Totally.
So I've had to learn to walk again. I don't know, at least 6 times. I've had surgeries. I've had 3 replaced hips, and so on. And so it's like, okay, that workout, that gym workout. I've been very sporty in my life previously, and when you haven't done it for a while, there is pain. It hurts.
Yes.
But if we persist and we stay in that strength, we will gain greater strength, and it builds, and it slowly builds over time. So to your point, be kind to ourselves. Be kind, and just take one step at a time. And that just takes me to Africa. I climbed Kilimanjaro.
Yes, I've also climbed Kilimanjaro, which anybody who meets me will find it really hard to believe, because I'm not a fan of hiking or camping.
So we had this pre-climbing coaching, if you will, and this dear old lady standing there on her carved out walking stick, and the most exquisite accent, very intentional. And she goes, "Poly, poly, slowly, slowly." And I'll never forget that. And I do write about it a little bit in the book. And it's this mindset. Can we just slow down in life?
Yes.
And you were saying earlier, with our schedules, so as not to react, right?
Yes.
So just slow down. Excess baggage. We carry around so much we don't need to. We pack our schedules so full. So just poly in life.
Yeah.
And just one step at a time.
Yeah.
And take control of the mindset, the belief, our next step. And it when you do that, it is very freeing, and it will take you above the turbulence. And I tell you, up there above the turbulence, the perspective is awesome. It is glorious. And you kind of hang out up there instead, but and yes, I just love all of that. So yes, it's intentional. It's a workout. It takes us perhaps into painful places. But again, on my travels, I was in Ambrose in France, and I went to Da Vinci's home where he spent his last, I think, 5 years.
Okay.
And very interesting again. I thought Da Vinci just, was a painter.
Oh, no.
Well, oh, no.
Man of many talents.
Exactly. That was my belief of who this man was.
Yes.
When I went into this house, it was 800. It's like I've walked back 800 years.
Yeah.
It was incredible. And then walking through this magnificent garden. But one thing that really stopped me was a phrase that was put out of one of his comments that I can't quote it accurately. I'm not good at that. But basically, he was inviting us back into like a dark chasms of life. And just maybe when we illuminate the light, the truth, into this dark place of possibly lie, hide in the depths, in the dark, painful places of our lives. But when we illuminate light into there, oh my gosh, that is where things start to grow. You add light to something, it illuminates the truth.
Yes.
And he said, just maybe that is where it starts.
Yes.
So for your people listening, I would encourage them just to stop, to pause, to slow down, and actually know who you are, revisit some of this, tease out the truth, because there is real power in there. There's light and life in there.
Yes.
It is awesome, but you need the courage to do it, and you need intentionality to do it, because we don't want our hand on that hot element anymore. No. Getting burned. Yes. We just don't. And I'll just read something that I think is very powerful. Yeah. Page 12. The past has purpose. Until we stop, face, and heal the wounds of our past, they will continue to bleed, leaving a stain on our lives.
Brilliant.
It's like picking at a scab.
Absolutely. And I think it's just this, I love that we're ending with that very powerful quote, because I think if we are brave enough to, like you've said, to have a little look at what's happened before, shine a light on it, which can be hard. Yes. Learn from it, heal it, and move forwards with a different perspective. And with that learning, life can unfold completely differently. And I think that is where we have huge power to change our own lives.
And just quickly on that note too, no longer is it a scab, it's a scar. And scars, in my focus point and the way I frame it, a scar, and I look at my scars on my body, are symbols of victory.
Yes.
I am healed, whereas if I had a scab, I'm not. No. Because it can still be, but a scar doesn't. It's healed over, and that has given me the strength. With my new hips, I've got these scars. Yes. Oh my gosh, I am full steam ahead. I'm healed, and I'm living life.
Yeah, and that's wonderful. So Carolyn, your book, I'm going to share the link in the show notes. Above the Turbulence is available to buy on Amazon. So I will share the link for folks who are interested in having a look at the book, and getting a hold of a copy of that. And I believe there is something very special happening with the book proceeds. Yes. Please tell us a little bit about that.
Oh my gosh. Well, I have to take you back to when I was a child, and I was given money for my birthday and Christmas, and I don't know what seed or why the seed was planted back then. I mean, I do now, 60 years later, but I just had a love for Africa. And I would go with my mom, and we would buy the most beautiful picture books of all things Africa and the wild, these animals. I just loved animals, and I would sketch them. Well, fast forward, I'm now a travel agent. I'm in my 20s and I am pinching myself. I am in Africa. I'm in the Serengeti. I'm looking at these incredible lion and giraffe. I'm just like, this is amazing. So here we are. Each night we would stop, and the grasses were there, and I'm in the wild, and we're trying to gather sticks to light the fire for dinner, and these little faces pop out, and I'm like, oh, hello. And we couldn't speak English, but we spoke the language of humanness, and the joy on their faces were like, wow, you have seemingly nothing, but look at the joy. They had joy, and you could tell because they were dancing and smiling. They welcomed me into their home. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is incredible. I'd love to connect one day. And then, life goes on.
Yep.
A decade later, I have my daughter. She's 19, and she finds herself with Habitat for Humanity, building mud bricks for orphan children in Malawi. She comes up with these photos, and I'm like, oh my goodness, they're those little faces again. Aren't they just precious? Oh my gosh, they're amazing. So when I started writing my book, fast forward another decade, I'm at a writing conference in Austin, Texas, and I meet this guy, Eric Mills, and we're exhausted. We got a drink. We're sitting around the fire, and I'm like, oh, Eric, so what's your story? Oh, well, I'm writing a story about adopting an orphan child from China. But from there, I've actually formed a foundation, and it's called Faces with Names. He showed me his brochure.
Oh.
Look at those faces. And I'm just like, it was an epiphany. I just went, oh my gosh, since I was 5. So 5 decades later, it's come full circle.
Yep.
And I just knew then, oh my gosh, my heart is for them. This is my moment, and I want to donate all proceeds to Faces with Names. And I'm so excited because in probably March, actually, 24, my daughter and I are going together.
Amazing.
We are going to go and visit these little children. And I met the pastor, Daniel, and his wife, Mama Erica, who looks after these kids.
Yeah.
They fostered over 50 children themselves with seemingly nothing.
Yes.
And the vision, oh my gosh, please people check this out. It's incredible, the vision and what is happening. And we are providing hope in the hopeless scenario for these orphan kids. It's amazing.
Brilliant. I love it. What a great note to end on. So I will share the link. It's faceswithnames.org. So I will pop the link in the show notes as well for anyone who wants to have a look at where the proceeds from your book are going. So encourage you to buy the book, and then you're going to be getting an excellent read, and also you're going to be helping some little people as well. In Rwanda, I believe they are. Uganda. Okay, so you're going to be helping littlies in Uganda.
Yes.
Amazing. Carolyn, thank you very much for joining me today. It's been really great to speak to you, and thanks everybody for listening.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. It's been a privilege. I appreciate the time and all that you're doing. It's incredible. So thank you.
Thanks very much. We'll see you in the next episode, folks. Bye for now. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you've enjoyed it, please share with your friends, and be sure to leave me a 5-star rating and review, especially if you're listening on Apple Podcasts. To find out more about my one-on-one coaching, please visit my website, which is emmaobriencoach.com. And remember, folks, when life gives you lemons, you can always choose another fruit. See you next time.